So we'll go ahead and start. I We're going to look into Buddha nature now from the perspective of the three turnings of the wheel, the Four Noble Truths, kind of its relationship in the Sutra and Tantra view, and it's kind of bringing different things that we've been learning this semester together. And the book that this reading is coming from is called Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature by His Holiness and Thupten Chödrön. And this whole series is quite recent, and it's really, really well done, particularly aimed at Westerners. So this little section that we're reading from today is from that book. And so I recommend everybody get it if you're intrigued. It has really very clear ways of explaining things in our kind of Western education way, you know, as opposed to kind of the Tibetan style, which sometimes you have to get your head around what's being said a lot longer before you even know if you agree or understand, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really beautifully written as well as beautifully edited text. So we're going to start by looking at the three turnings of the Dharma wheel and Buddha nature. Page 61, everybody there? So I'll read it slowly and stop at the different paragraph breaks, and then if you want to jump in and clarify anything, please do. But I think a lot of it is quite self-explanatory, so jump in please if you want to clarify a section. Otherwise I'll just read this bit for you. The first turning of the Dharma wheel presents the overall structure of the Buddhist worldview based on the Four Truths. First turning of the wheel. The second turning of the Dharma wheel contains more detailed explanation of the third and fourth truths and presents the emptiness of inherent existence and the Bodhisattva path. So mainly we look at the second turning of the wheel. The essence of the third truth, true cessation, is understood in the context of the emptiness of the mind. The fourth truth, true path, is wisdom realizing that emptiness. We see a progression. The first turning of the Dharma wheel discusses selflessness, anatman, in a general way. Having described the nature or identity of each truth and the way to engage with it, the Buddha explained the result to an understanding of each truth. Here he said that true cessation is to be actualized, but there is nothing to actualize. This statement has deep implications. So just sit with that for a second. He said that true cessation is to be actualized, but there is nothing to actualize. So this is really referring to the innate Buddha nature, the naturally abiding Buddha nature, that aspect of the mind that is permanent, that aspect of the mind that is pure and perfect and always has been so, as opposed to the aspects that need to be developed and purified. So the Buddha wants us to understand emptiness, true cessation, and the unborn nature of phenomena. In the second turning, the Buddha clarified that the precise meaning of selflessness is the emptiness of inherent existence, shunyata, the unborn nature. He also described the wisdom realizing this unborn nature. Here he calls it objectless, or non-objectifying wisdom. because it has ceased the apprehension of any objectifiable basis or inherent existence in persons and phenomena. Okay, so far, this is kind of a review of Four Noble Truths, but more in the context of the Buddha nature topic. And it's talking a little bit about the three turnings of the wheel, which were suited to specific dispositions of specific disciples. So far, are you with me, or do you want to unpack anything there? It's good. So the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which were taught in the second turning, and the Ornament of Clear Realization, a commentary by Maitreya on those sutras, explain the Tathagata Garbha, Buddha essence, Buddha nature, Buddha potential, all synonyms, from the perspective of it being the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind. Okay, so in the second turning, Buddha nature is the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind, highlight. The third turning of the Dharma wheel delves deeper. The purified aspect of the emptiness of the mind is true cessation, but what mind is the basis of that emptiness? What mind is the basis of that emptiness? The ordinary mind we have at present, which is the basis of all our afflictions, is not that mind. Our sense consciousnesses also cannot be that basis, because they are not stable and continuous. Nor can afflictive minds, such as ignorance, be that basis, because the continuity of ignorance is not present at Buddhahood, and thus the emptiness of ignorance is also absent then. The mind that is the basis for true cessation must be a pure mind, pure in that afflictions have not entered into its nature. So afflictions can be there, but they haven't entered into it or become inseparable from it. That mind must be beginningless and endless, because its continuum must go without interruption to Buddhahood and become a Buddha's mind. This mind is the clear light mind that can become a liberating path, the subject clear light, realizing the object clear light, the emptiness of the mind. This is the Tathagata Garbha presented in the third turning. While the second speaks of Tathagata Garbha primarily as the object, emptiness, the third turning presents it as the subject, the clear light mind that can realize emptiness, which is also the basis of that emptiness. So is this making sense? Or basically what's being said here is that there is the emptiness of the mind, and then there is the mind that realizes that the mind is empty. Yes? So there's the fact that mind is empty of inherent existence. That's a fact that is a characteristic of mind. There are many characteristics of mind. Mind is clear and knowing. Mind has this and mind has that. It has main minds and mental factors. There are 7 types of awareness. There are many characteristics of mind. One of the characteristics of mind is that it is empty of inherent existence. Then there is the mind that perceives that, right? So we have object and subject. And it's easy to kind of mix them together and get confused. And of course, eventually they get mixed together in a non-dual way that is unconfused. But for right now, we need to kind of conceptually isolate them a little bit.
What is the unborn nature of phenomena that is mentioned here?
The fact of their emptiness.
It's also called the unborn nature?
Yes. Which gives a specific connotation, right? To say something is unborn means it's not created, it's not produced, it's not reliant upon causes and conditions, it's naturally present. So it still depends on parts, it still depends on a basis of imputation, it still depends on a mind's imputation, but permanent phenomena don't need to be produced, do they? So it's unborn. It gives a particular connotation to our understanding of emptiness. So it's a word you'll find pop up all over the place when you see unborn, unceasing. It's saying the emptiness of the mind is permanent, it's unproduced.
It means that it's always been there, and there's no time endless.
Exactly. Yeah, it's also referring to that beginninglessness and that endlessness. Yeah.
So this is a quality that is always there for all phenomena and for the mind.
Yes.
As a phenomena as well. right?
Yeah.
Unborn nature.
Yep.
Yeah, which is good news. Yeah, it's a good, you know, the first time you hear that, you're kind of like, what? And it pops up all over the place. And so it's good to kind of flesh that word out, unborn. And it gives you an interesting sense of the world, doesn't it? That there's an impermanent, fluctuating, changeable nature that most things have. Of course, there are other permanent things besides emptiness, like space, etc. But the things that cause trouble generally are in the category of impermanent. But all of those troublemaker things have a permanent aspect which allows for their transformation. If they weren't empty, they couldn't change. If they weren't empty, they couldn't transform. So that unborn nature, we don't need to create that nature. We don't need to fabricate it or make it newly. It's already there. Yeah. So it's good news. Good news. Top of page 62. In this way, the second turning of the Dharma wheel gives a thorough account of emptiness, the third truth, true cessation. While the third turning presents a thorough explanation of the fourth truth, true path. Here, the Buddha introduces the clear light mind, a mind that has always been and will always continue to be pure. However, he does not explain how to access and realize that mind. Where can we find a deeper explanation of the clear light mind and the method to actualize it? This is the key that opens the door to Tantra. A disciple who wants to learn about this mind in more depth cannot find the explanation in Sutra, so she is automatically drawn to Tantra. Of the 4 classes of Tantra, the first 3 are preparations for the fourth, the highest Yoga Tantra, which contains the real meaning of Tantra. The highest Yoga Tantra provides a clear explanation about how to access the fundamental innate clear light mind, utilize it, and transform it into a virtuous mental state, a true path that realizes emptiness. The development of this wisdom mind culminates in the state of union, the state of full awakening described in Tantra. Okay, so coming back to this concept of Tantra, there are 4 classes of Tantra. The class of Tantra that we touch the surface of in our meditations on Tara, on Medicine Buddha, etc. This is called Kriya Tantra, Lower Tantra, Action Tantra. Those are all synonyms. So we look at the lowest class of Tantra to start to get familiar with the idea of having calm abiding and special insight together, to start to get used to the idea of using our senses for us instead of against us, because we are visualizing while reciting, while thinking, while having a tactile object of the mala. We're, having a multitasking meditation and starting to get the senses to all kind of come into alignment. At that level of Tantra, the main transformation that is sought is to dispel any obstacles to having a long life. Yeah, so they're mostly for health and well-being of this life. The idea behind it is that you need health and well-being for this life in order to practice highest Yoga Tantra so that you can become enlightened in one life of the degenerate age. So it's kind of like we want to create the cause for a very long and healthy life so that you can practice the full path. Although lots of people practice lower Tantra just to have a long and healthy life. Right? And of course, the background of that is you want a long and healthy life that is continually being of benefit to sentient beings, that is, being a good neighbor and citizen and family member and all of that good stuff that we all value. But in the background is the only point of having a healthy life is so that you can practice the whole time, not so that you can have an enjoyable retirement, So that's the underground reason for lower Tantra. So the underground reason for lower Tantra is in order to practice higher Tantra. And the lower Tantras describe more physical behaviors and restraints, and the higher Tantras are more about internal ideas and overcoming ordinary appearances and grasping to them. So in the beginning, when you do lower Tantra practices in their fully fledged form, there's a lot of discussion of taking vows, one-day vow, for example, There can be a lot of discussion of eating the right things, sleeping in a certain way, you know, external behaviors that support internal mental states. As you progress, it becomes less and less and less about the external, because you're becoming more and more mature and less kind of attracted by forms.
Is this practice related to, you talked about preparing, or how can the bodhicitta mind become main mind? So this kind of practice that you can follows you or is with you throughout the day because it uses senses, maybe helps in this preparation of making the bodhicitta mind the main mind?
Yes, yes, certainly, exactly that. It's the more you can fully engage the mind in bodhicitta, the quicker it will move from a mental factor into a main mind. Yeah, so the more familiarity, the more all-encompassing your focus is, the quicker the progress will be. That's a huge point in Tantra. And the idea is also that you need to have a very strong renunciation for samsara. Otherwise, starting to utilize the senses will just remind you of how much fun you can have with your senses, you know? And so then you can be like, ooh, that's pretty. I'm gonna fill my whole house with tankas, and there's gonna be pictures everywhere in every color, and it's gonna look like a Tibetan picnic explosion in my house. And you get completely lost in the beauty of the visual and forget the point. Or you can love the sound of the mantras and listen to nothing but mantras, but you're listening to it as music and kind of losing yourself in that way. So it's like you need very strong renunciation in order to utilize the senses for reinforcing bodhicitta. Otherwise, inviting the senses into your meditation just becomes a very intriguing temptation. You can see how that happens. Normally in our meditation, like breath meditation, senses will hear something and you'll say, yep, I hear a sound, back to the breath. Oh, I see a color, back to the breath. I'm thinking about something, back to the breath. And we're not inviting the senses into our meditation. We're saying the senses, I hear you, I see you, you have needs, we'll talk about them later, but right now, breath. In Tantra, you're saying, all right, everybody in. Yeah, I'm using all of you to reinforce my bodhicitta. So you can see why it takes a stronger will, you know, it takes a stronger basis of why am I doing this? What am I getting out of? What am I moving toward? Otherwise, the intriguingness of all of the beauty and all of the sensory stuff, you'll just get swept up and it'll become another form of, you know, exploring samsara and all of the fun you can have with the samsaric mind and forgetting to get out of it and forgetting to benefit sentient beings. So it's a classic thing that can happen. But knowing that hopefully prevents you from doing that. An interesting note is that His Holiness is going to give a Chenrezig empowerment at the end of the month live from Dharamsala. And so if you want to practice lower Tantra, that is coming up. But you know, it's important to know that to practice even lower Tantra, it's important to identify as a Buddhist and have Buddhist refuge. You don't have to tell anyone that. No one has to know that. But to practice Tantra, you do need to have refuge. And at an empowerment, you'll also take Bodhisattva vows, which you can read ahead of time, and you can read the Bodhisattva vows and see if you like them. They're all nice things, you know, but the first Bodhisattva vow is to avoid praising oneself and belittling others. So that's like, yay, we're all on board with that, but it's hard to do, yes? Just in the course of one day, if someone does something outrageous, like, how could they park in the parking spot that way? I never park that way. Vow transgressed, done, right? But you can repair it. So, so the background of Bodhisattva vows is that Shantideva would say that they're like a beautiful golden vase, very, very precious, very easily dented, but very easily repaired. Yeah, so to break a Bodhisattva vow at the root, you have to want to decide to be happy about it, you know. So to transgress them is very easy, but to break them at the root is actually quite hard. You have to really want to. So if you are interested in starting Lower Tantra, that's coming up at the end of the month. Yeah, Orna?
Can you make clear what main mind in comparison to what, or what are the differences between the beginner's mind and the main mind?
I'm making a distinction between main minds and mental factors. Yeah, do you remember from minds and mental factors? Main minds were like the sky, mental factors like the clouds. Main minds, clear and knowing, more perceptual, mental factors, more conceptual, moving, thinking, engaging. So bodhicitta starts as a thought you have to make on purpose, thinking about it, deciding to. When you do that often enough, it becomes your natural way of having mind. It becomes a natural part of your consciousness without needing to stop and think about it. It becomes natural. And then it informs and imbues every other thought and action that you have. So that transition point from it being a thought you have to manufacture into a way of thinking you always have continuously is the shift from it being a main mind into being a mental factor. Also the shift from it being I guess, uncontrived, contrived to uncontrived and becoming a pathway awareness.
Is it like going back to maybe the, I don't want to say natural state of mind, because maybe it implies, maybe it contradicts emptiness, but of the mind, but if you have to practice in order to make bodhicitta your main mind, but isn't it, you talked about it being the result or the natural result of right understanding, more like correcting an error of a wrong main mind that we are now going about with?
Conflictive states of mind can't enter into the very essence of the mind. They're always removable. Positive states of mind can become main minds. So negative states of mind live in the realm of mental factors, and they come and they go, and they're very habitual and they're very spontaneous and natural to us. And just because we don't have to stop and think, I should be angry, that kind of spontaneity isn't what's being talked about in the spontaneity of a main mind. An unfabricated main mind, you know, a natural main mind. That is something that is the result of, yes, a correct understanding and a developmental process, but that developmental process isn't leading you to your, quote, natural state. It is something new. The realization of emptiness is, in a way, correcting a mistake. Yeah, we've had innate ignorance from beginningless time. The realization of emptiness is correcting that mistake and then purifying all of the eons of having had that mistake. Bodhicitta is something that directly counteracts self-cherishing. So self-grasping is directly counteracted by the wisdom realizing emptiness. Self-cherishing is directly counteracted by bodhicitta, which is cherishing others. So they help each other out, right? Bodhicitta and emptiness help each other out. The more you understand emptiness, the less it makes sense to harm others. The less cherishing oneself over others makes sense. It just doesn't have as much power anymore.
You just mentioned it before, the first of the bodhisattva.
The vow.
It's to refrain from praising oneself and criticizing others.
Repeat, please.
There are 18 of them and 46 secondary ones, or I can send it to you afterwards. But yeah, they're along similar lines of refraining from praising oneself, belittling others, not sharing your wealth or the Dharma. I could go through them all, but it's Bodhisattva vows. I can send it to you after this class, though, if you want to read through them. I'll go ahead and do that, so just in case you're curious. And then the 46 secondary vows are all related to the 6 perfections. So one's to help you with generosity, one's to help you with patience, one's to help you with ethics, etc., etc. So they're beautiful and you'll love them, but they're a little bit intimidating when you first read them. So remember that to keep it purely means that you recognize when you make a mistake, you repair it, and it's back to perfect. In Buddhism, taking a vow doesn't mean that you're fundamentally perfect all the time, otherwise there would be no point in having it. To break it at the root means you basically plotted to break it, wanted to break it, said about breaking it, and then were like happy about it. You know, so you thought, I shall criticize everyone and praise myself, and I will love doing this, and you've made a diabolical plan like an evil villain. It's unlikely. But of course, out of distraction or carelessness or habit, you might do it, and that's a different case, and you can repair that quite quickly. So it's interesting, it's something to not take lightly though, remembering that whenever you take an empowerment from someone, even a lower Tantra empowerment, you're making a guru-disciple relationship with the one who gave you the empowerment. So you could think, I would really like to practice Tantra, I really like Chen Rezig, that's the empowerment coming out. But this teacher I'm not sure about, oh well, don't think that. You have to really think His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a valid teacher, which of course of the teachers, he's the easiest to think is a valid teacher. And in terms of vetting processes, you know, he's lived in the public eye for all of his life pretty much. And so if there had been dodginess, we would know, but still. I think that when you're looking at, should I take Tantra or not, don't rush into it, but don't forget death is coming. Live in that place of, there's a certain amount of might as well get started if this is something I'm interested in and have loved for a long time, but I also don't want to force it or push it if I'm just not quite sure yet. So it's a completely personal decision. But lower Tantra, there are usually very few daily practice commitments, if any. So if there are daily practice commitments, it's usually along the lines of saying the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum a certain number of times a day, like 7 times or 21 times or 100 times. And it's usually not more than that in terms of daily practice commitment. But the underground commitment, which is quite significant, is having bodhisattva vows. And that's incredibly powerful and beautiful and a wonderful thing to do, but not to be taken lightly either, because you know, it's profound stuff. Usually His Holiness says it's okay to sit in on such things and take them as a blessing, even if you're not ready to take the empowerment and do the practice. If you're just curious what he's going to do and you just want to watch, usually His Holiness says that's fine, and he'll turn off the live streaming if it gets to a private section or something that he doesn't want to go out publicly. So if you're just curious and you want to see how they go, it's fine to sit in and just watch as well, and you don't need to feel like you've now taken on a commitment. So anyway, if anyone wants to talk in private or email me any questions, I'm very happy to do that, but it's so individual that probably we won't talk too much about it here. It's a really individual choice, and you can still be Jewish and practice and be a Buddhist. You can be a Jubu, okay? So you're not giving up one identity in favor of the other. You can be a Jubu. There's plenty. People often ask that. That's why I mention it. Okay. So, all right. Yeah, any other bits before we continue on with the text? Today's just a gentle reading day, and we'll flesh out some of the points next week. I just kind of want to get us all kind of tidied up what we've done so far. We're still on the top of page 62. The highest Yoga Tantra provides a clear explanation about how to access the fundamental innate clear light mind, utilize it and transform it into a virtuous mental state, a true path that realizes emptiness. So the way in which it does this is something that you've already started but not finished, which is the meditation on the 8 stages at the time of death. When you go through those different visions and you arrive at the clear light mind, you try to see it as empty. So the clear light mind, the innate fundamental mind, arises naturally at the time of death. You don't have to force it, it just happens naturally through the death process. What we need to add to that is then to recognize its emptiness. So it appears, it reveals itself as empty, but we usually don't recognize that to be the case. So that's why we need a lot of education and training in order for that arising and that understanding to come up simultaneously. Together with that, then in highest yoga tantra, there are subsequent steps to go on with your transformation using having recognized the clear light nature of mind. And then there's ways to go through that process, not just in imagination, but actually experientially, as if you were dying while you're still alive and healthy. So you're able to, those visions actually appear because your mind is literally becoming more and more subtle and less related to the elements or supported by the elements. So instead of that being an imagined process, it becomes a real process, but that happens through imagining it a lot. The true path, and okay, so then the development of this wisdom culminates in the state of union, the full state of awakening described in Tantra. From this perspective, Nagarjuna's commentary on bodhicitta can be seen as a commentary on the third turning because it unpacks the meaning of a verse from the Gyuyasmaja root tantra. The Gyuyasmaja root tantra is kind of the main tantric text that the other tantras flow forth from. It says, devoid of all real entities, utterly discarding all subjects and objects, such as aggregates, elements, and sense sources, due to sameness of selflessness of all phenomena, one's mind is primordially unborn. It is the nature of emptiness. Similarly, Nagarjuna's praise to the sphere of reality comments primarily on the subject matter of the third turning, the subject clear light mind, but hints at the meaning of the clear light mind as explained in Tantra. It says, just as asbestos cloth that is filthy with all kinds of dirt, when put into fire, the filth is burnt, but not the cloth. Similarly, it is the case with the clear light mind, which has defilements. Produced by attachment, the fire of pristine wisdom burns the defilements, but not that clear light mind. So this is moving from like those 9 analogies of Buddha nature into the tantric analogies of Buddha nature. So asbestos cloth, I don't know if we use asbestos cloth anymore because it gives you cancer, but you know, it's a very kind of robust substance that if you get it dirty and you throw it in the fire, the dirt burns up, but it's still there, happy and robust. You know, we used to use asbestos in roofing and insulation and things like that. I don't know what the word is in Hebrew, but it's robust. And it can burn without being burnt. Another analogy of Buddha nature being revealed in Tantra is just as a termite, you know, one of these little wood-eating white ants, is born from wood, it then goes on to eat the wood. So in Tantra, we generate negative states of mind on purpose, remembering emptiness. So you generate attachment, remembering emptiness, then it destroys attachment. Yeah, so if you generate attachment, but remember emptiness while you do so, it destroys the very attachment you cultivated and brought up, just as a termite born from wood eats the wood. And that's kind of a basic premise in tantric transformation of negative emotions. Does that make sense? So normally we're applying an antidote to negative states of mind. In Tantra, you're saying, come on up, let's have a look at you. Let's enjoy the whole drama of it, but remember that it's empty and that will destroy it. That's very basic, yeah. There's more to the story, but that's getting you in the right space for it. So continuing, it says, when the fireproof asbestos cloth is put in fire, the stains on it burn until they disappear completely, but the cloth remains untouched. Likewise, when the ordinary mind of sentient beings, the clear light mind, is exposed to the realization of emptiness, the stains on the mind, attachment, and so forth are removed, but the clear light mind remains. True cessation ultimately refers to the emptiness of the subtlest clear light mind that has become an awakened mind. Although this is not explicitly stated in the third turning, The clear light mind mentioned in the third turning ultimately refers to the clear light mind of highest Yoga Tantra. Here we see that the 3 turnings of the Dharma wheel are not disconnected teachings on different topics. Each turning is closely linked to the previous one. It builds on and unpacks the meaning of the previous turning in more depth and detail. In this way, the Buddha, a skillful and wise teacher, gradually leads us to deeper understandings. Similarly, each turning hints at deeper explanations found in future teachings. So the area where it's easiest to get confused here is we know that the second turning of the wheel has the subtlest view of emptiness. But then there's a third turning. How is that more subtle? And the way in which the third turning is more subtle is its explanation of mind. Yeah, so its explanation of emptiness in the third turning is not as subtle and not as referenced, but its explanation of mind is. So the 3 turnings are, not kind of 3 divorced packaged teachings for 3 separate kinds of beings, even though they hit the dispositions of different beings differently. Some people right away love 1, right away love 3, right away love 2. And there's kind of an affinity or a disposition that you really resonate with, but all 3 are to be practiced and understood. Just some interesting things to think about, but finishing this section over the page. To summarize, in the context of the 3 turnings, from the sutra perspective, Buddha nature is of 2 types: the emptiness of the mind, the object that is perceived, as explained in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras in the second turning. 2, the mind that is the basis of that emptiness. This undefiled mind has existed beginninglessly and will transform into the liberating paths that perceive this emptiness. Saying this mind is clear light means that the defilements are not an inherent property of this mind. This is really important, right? Saying this mind is clear light means that the defilements are not an inherent property of the mind. They are extra, they're additional, they're adventitious, they're removable. As the third turning leads us to understand the emptiness of the mind is the natural Buddha nature, and the basis of this emptiness is the transforming Buddha nature. Both are Buddha nature according to the sutra explanation. Furthermore, there is an extremely subtle mind that is the clear light mind and the seed of wisdom. It too is Buddha nature. The full explanation of this mind and how to access it is presented in Tantra, specifically in Highest Yoga Tantra. Okay, so the piece to make sure that we don't lose before we move into anything else is to remember that there is the natural Buddha nature and the transforming Buddha nature. And these have many different translations. So if you know what they are, then when you see the different translations, you're not going to be confused. So natural Buddha nature, or naturally abiding Buddha nature, or fundamental purity, this refers to the emptiness of the mind that's always been there and will lead to the Dharmakaya, that is the Swabhavikakaya, the nature truth body. Okay, so that's like your natural unborn, that one. The Buddha nature that is to be developed is called the transforming Buddha nature. It's called adventitious purity. It has a lot of different synonyms and translation choices. And rather than use the same one again and again, I will just use them interchangeably because that's what you'll find in texts going down the track. And this issue of not consistent translation choices is a struggle for all of us. So I think it creates a good flexibility of mind to understand the essence of the meaning, then the words won't throw you. So do you understand that Buddha nature is of 2 types? Yeah, that which is naturally present, that which needs to be developed. It's popped up again and again, but we just need to be really clear that when we say Buddha nature as an umbrella term, it has these two aspects. And these two aspects lead to two different truth bodies for a Buddha. The Jnana Dharmakaya and the Swabhavikakaya, the nature truth body and the wisdom truth body. So that's important to realize, because a very common misunderstanding for new Buddhists is to think that you're already a Buddha, you just need to wake up, right? Or you're already perfect, you just need to dust it off. And that is only half true, right? It's half true. Okay, any questions about those two? Yeah.
Can you say more? Can you say again the difference in the developing Buddha nature? A little bit more about it again?
So the developing Buddha nature is still related to the emptiness of the mind, but it's what you do with the fact of its emptiness. So because the mind is empty, you can transform it. The way to transform it completely is to realize the emptiness of the mind. So there's the fact of the emptiness of the mind, and then there's realizing the fact of the emptiness of the mind. So the fact of the emptiness of the mind is related to the natural purity. It is, whether you know it or not, whether you remember it or not, the mind has always been pure and perfect in its empty state. Knowing that emptiness is what's being talked about in the transforming Buddha nature. So knowing that, then you practice your meditation on emptiness, particularly looking at the emptiness of mind, the emptiness of self, and then eventually the emptiness of all phenomena. And that leads to the Jnana Dharmakaya. Yeah, so it's something that it can sound like we're talking about the same thing, because subject and object get all kind of mixed together. And the object is the subject and the subject is the object, and it gets kind of like, what? But just to hear that there's the fact of it, and then there's the knowing the fact of it. The knowing the fact of it is something that we need to train in. But even if we never train in, the fact of it will never change.
I think you're talking about when we realize the transformative Buddha nature, we become one with the natural Buddha nature. You loses this distinction between subject and object. Yeah, it's dissolved. The transformative is dissolved when you are realizing it. Yeah, it becomes the thing itself.
Ish. I mean, realizing it and then developing that realization, as long as you also remember and developing that realization. We may have even had glimpses of emptiness in our past, glimpses of emptiness in our past lives, in this life, glimpses, but those glimpses of knowing aren't enough to fundamentally transform you. It needs to be organized and repeated, and clarified and tidied and repeated and repeated. And that repetition process is like taking the pure gold and forming it into a Buddhist statue. The gold is there, it'll always be there, you can't mess it up, but just seeing it is not completely enough. You also have to shape it into something.
The Buddha himself doesn't need the transformative side. He only maybe for teaching, but in his essence, he is always the natural.
Well, the transforming, it's a good point that you're making, because the transforming side in one aspect is leading to one form of the Dharmakaya, which is for his own sake. But the rest of the transforming nature, it related to the adventitious purity, are the two Buddha bodies for the sake of others. So that, it's like, but if you're thinking that the emptiness of the mind will have two results. Okay, the emptiness of the mind, its fact will lead to the naturally abiding Buddha nature being fully developed. Knowing that will lead to this truth body for your own sake. And the transforming Buddha nature also is related to all of the work that you do on the method side. Wisdom, you know, yes, but compassion, loving kindness, patience, all of the positive work that you do will lead to the Buddha bodies for the sake of others. Yeah, so in a way, the transforming Buddha nature is partially for your own sake, but mostly for the sake of others. But you still do need to realize it for your own sake as well. So the point that really is important to bring home is that understanding a truth is not enough to live by a truth. We already know that just from our own life. You know, why do we do the wrong thing even when we know it's the wrong thing? What is the thing that fundamentally shifts you into integrating with your knowledge? Yeah, and it's primarily repetition, clarification and repetition. So the transforming Buddha nature is for your own sake and for the sake of others. The natural Buddha nature is just for your own sake, in a sense, because it will lead to the freedom from suffering. But you know, these are all just conceptually isolated. Buddha nature, you know, I guess from a distance, for the lack of a better word, is one thing. And then we conceptually isolate it into parts. Just like this is a hand, it's one thing, it's just a hand. But conceptually we could say, and there's fingers here, and there's a back here, and a front, you know, you can conceptually isolate it into parts. But if you were to take all the fingers, is there a hand left? No, it's just a palm, right? So similarly, the Buddha nature, if you were to like take out a bit, it's no longer talking about the Buddha bodies anymore. You know, you can't be a full Buddha without the four bodies.
So it's not only for your own sake, because you can't go to the higher levels if you don't realize the first one.
Yeah, and this is the fundamental philosophical debate between the foundational vehicle and the Mahayana vehicle, is that they think that achieving nirvana, basically seeing your natural purity and developing your transforming purity, just wisdom realizing emptiness, on its own is enough because you're freed from suffering. But because that's not been fully developed, the transforming essence hasn't been fully developed into all four Buddha bodies, your ability to benefit others is limited. So they would say it's enough to just achieve the Dharmakaya, even if they wouldn't put it in those words. They would say the Dharmakaya is enough. We would say you need the Rupakayas too, the two form bodies too, because then you can benefit others. And in order to have those, you need full omniscience. In order to have full omniscience, you need to have removed all of the imprints as well as all of the seeds. So they still have imprints remaining. They just don't have seeds. Yeah, they don't have negative karmic seeds when they're abiding in nirvana, but they still have imprints. So it's like they have a subtle form of self-cherishing, which is no longer the damaging self-cherishing that is harming others, but it still has a level of indifference that doesn't take full personal responsibility. So that's something that we're trying to overcome from the very beginning, is we might not be having the kind of self-cherishing that is actively wanting to harm, but we do have the kind of self-cherishing that has a bit of indifference and disconnect from the suffering of others and our part in alleviating that suffering. We might see the suffering and think, oh, gee, isn't that terrible? Poor starving people in Yemen, that's horrible. I'm so sad for them. Anyway, you know, and it's actually got a little bit of indifference to it. We see the suffering, we wish them freedom from suffering, but we're not taking any personal responsibility about our role in why they're suffering and our role in alleviating that. You know, so it's a little bit like if we were abiding in nirvana, of course we would wish everyone well, we would have lots of compassion and love, but wouldn't have that element of taking personal responsibility. What can I do to help them finish their path? What can I do to help alleviate their suffering? Yeah, so if at the very beginning we're trying to overcome that kind of indifference, it's going to really speed up the path. If you don't, you abide in nirvana, and eventually a Buddha exhorts you. Remember what we talked about before? You're abiding in nirvana, and then you get a bit of a shoulder tap. Even if you're without a body at that point, you get a shoulder tap from the Buddha that says, you're not done yet. Yeah, and then you finish your path. Yeah, so eventually everyone will become enlightened is the idea, even if you don't have bodhicitta from the outset. Yeah, Talia?
I don't know, this is like a weird question, but isn't it something that when you realize emptiness, you cannot have it without bodhicitta? Everybody's connected, so how can it be that you, I mean, okay, it can pass your mind, maybe you don't put an effort and personal responsibility for everything, but something has to change there. How can it be disconnected in that sense?
Yeah, it's like anything besides bodhicitta doesn't make sense if you've realized emptiness. That is the way our mind should go. I think when you've realized emptiness from the prasangika view, from the very subtlest view, the most profound view, I think the relationship with bodhicitta is completely intertwined, as you say. I think that the lower views of emptiness, which are going in the right direction and still have a huge impact, maybe there's more potential for self-cherishing with them. Yeah, that a less profound view of emptiness leads to a less profound view of altruism. There might be a relationship there. It's said that you can realize emptiness directly without bodhicitta, you know, and that foundational vehicle practitioners do. So that's what they tell me. But it seems just intuitively, as you say, you know, that they start to go together so naturally. Certainly compassion and emptiness go together very naturally. And that's for all practitioners across the board. So when we talk about foundational vehicle practitioners, never think I'm saying that they don't have compassion or they don't have love. They do. They have incredible compassion, incredible love. I think that, you know, from their perspective, they would even say that they do take personal responsibility for sentient beings. You know, when I was teaching this to a mixed group of Buddhists, there were some Sri Lankan Buddhists in the audience, and they were taking exception to this presentation. I tell you what, they were having some problems with it. And they were saying, no, 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 we think in nirvana, you do take personal responsibility for sentient beings. And you do have a knowing. And I was arguing with them about basically, what is it that prevents full omniscience? If you don't need full omniscience to be well yourself, to be completely at ease, you know, completely well yourself, no suffering whatsoever, would you really need omniscience? Or go, I'm done. Unless you've got a strong bodhicitta, you might say, I'm good now. I'm not causing harm. Whenever I can, I try to help. But, you know, the fact that I don't see all, oh well. For a Mahayanist, hopefully, you know, you're thinking that it will never be enough for my own suffering to be relieved. My work will never be done until everyone's suffering is relieved. Yeah, and that doesn't mean I need to suffer in the meantime. You can be free of your own suffering and still working to alleviate the suffering of others. But of course, the more progressed you get along the path, the less you do suffer. And the more distance you have from suffering, the harder it is to conjure up empathy and compassion. When you've just had a big grief and then recovered from it, the heart remains open and tender for a while. And then you know, recover and it hardens back up again. You know, similarly, if we have less negative karma ripening as suffering as we progress on the path, unless our bodhicitta is very strong, that joyfulness and that happiness that we have in the state of mind could make it really easy to forget how horrible it is to suffer in these deep ways that others do. You know, and then our wish to work for their welfare becomes less. So it's important for us to have a bit of suffering in our face, even if it's not our own suffering, just so we don't lose that connection, you know, that makes us keep going. Yeah, sorry. Yep, Tori?
Maybe it's not a good question, but the difference between bodhicitta and compassion is because compassion is the wish that to take the suffer from the other, right? To reduce the suffer from the other.
It's
the love
wanting
is
not
to
suffer.
what?
It's wanting them not to suffer.
Yeah, So the bodhicitta is the same thing, but actively?
And more than actively, it knows what that would take. So did you guys do the sevenfold cause and effect with maybe children or someone, going through recognizing all sentient beings as being your mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, blah, blah, blah. So remember that towards the end of it, you get the highest intention, which is, therefore I need to do it. Therefore I must take responsibility, but that's still not quite bodhicitta because you haven't accurately thought, how would I do that? So you could think, I want all sentient beings to be free of suffering, and I want to help do that, and I'm taking responsibility to do that. We can think that right in a second, and it's not bodhicitta yet until we realize, in order to do that, I have to become enlightened. Because otherwise, my help will be mistaken. It'll be an educated guess. If I want to help in an unmistaken way, that's not going to cause more harm than good, etc., I'm going to need full omniscience. So it's that shift from not just wanting to take responsibility, but knowing what that would take. To actually do it, what do you need to be? What sort of being? Does that make sense, that transition? So it's going in the right direction. So you've got, love, you've got compassion, then you have highest intention, and then you have to sit with, and in order to do that, I'm going to need to be completely enlightened. Of course, I'll get lots of good work done along the way, but to do it in a perfect way, I'm going to need full enlightenment because of the omniscience. So these 4 Buddha bodies that are the result of practice can be simplified into 2 Buddha bodies: wisdom bodies, form bodies, dharmakayas, rupakayas. The wisdom bodies, the dharmakayas, are for your own sake and are the result of the empty nature of the mind. Then the form bodies are the result of the method side of the path. Yeah, so just kind of recalibrating and remembering those points. There's a shift in a way of looking at this. So if you want to shift, it's a totally different way of looking at it. It's on page 78, the very last page of your semester text. It's called The Meeting of Mother and Child. So this is from a beautiful book by His Holiness called The Heart of Meditation. And it's talking about these same ideas of the clear light mind and how it is that we come into understanding of it, realization of it, development of it, etc. So this is just a different way of looking at the same content. In our ordinary state, whether or not we are a meditator, no matter who we are, the naturally arisen innermost awareness has been with us primordially. And for this reason, it is called the Mother Clear Light. This basic clear light, despite being always existent, previously was not identified. But once you are introduced by a Lama to the clear light, this new state, now that its existence has been identified, is called the child clear light. Yeah. In this way, we speak of 2 states of innermost awareness. The primordially existent, naturally arisen innermost awareness, the Mother Clear Light, and the identified innermost awareness, the Child Clear Light. Yeah, so naturally and identified. This identification of the natural face, of the naturally arisen innermost awareness that has integrally existed within yourself is called the meeting of the Mother and Child Clear Lights, and also the mixing of the Mother and Child Clear Lights. Although these are not actually 2 things, an object met, the Mother Clear Light, and the meter, a Child Clear Light, or an object mixed, the Mother Clear Light, and a mixer, the Child Clear Light, you have identified what has integrally existed all along in the basic state. This is metaphorically treated as the meeting of the Mother and Child Clear Lights. The message of the metaphor is that we need to identify what is already within. If, through the power of previous training in yoga, you can transform the mind of clear light integrally existing within you in the ordinary state into a spiritual path, this is also called the meeting of the Mother and Child Clear Lights, or the mixing of the Mother and Child Clear Lights. The mind of clear light that is a natural part of you in the ordinary state is called the mother clear light, and the clear light cultivated on the yogic path is called the child clear light. If, at the time of the dawning of the mother clear light at death, you are able to transform it into the spiritual path, this is the meaning in this context of the mother and child clear lights meeting or mixing. Again, this is not actually a meeting of two entities. Rather, the mother clear light of death, which dawns due to karma, turns into a spiritual consciousness, the child clear light. Due to previous training, the mother clear light does not become an ordinary mind of death, but is used to realize the truth of the emptiness of inherent existence, thereby undermining the afflictive emotions built on misapprehending phenomena as existing in and of themselves independently. So is that sitting well? Making sense? Mother and child? I don't know. I put it in there because psychoanalysts are always talking about mothers. So they say. Could be a total exaggeration and stereotype, and you never talk about mothers. Okay, then there's the poetic rendering, which I think is nice. It says, when Patrul Rinpoche says, for those with prior acquaintance, the mother and child clear light meet. Here the meaning is that the first of the two just explained. One clear light, the mother clear light, except for not having been identified, has naturally existed in us. The clear light to which we are introduced by a lama and which we identify and meditatively cultivate is the child clear light. Though the clear light of innermost awareness has always been there, it has not been identified. The mother and child clear light have not met, so to speak. However, when a lama has introduced us to that which has innately been there, and we have identified it through the power of our own intimate experience, this recognition is called the meeting of mother and child clear lights. So it's like the lama introduces you to each other, and then you recognize that. So there has to be an introduction, and there has to be a recognition. So it may be that we've been introduced many times, but never recognized, you know, what the lama is, you know, the primordial lama, the primordial guru, the, you know, guru-ness within so many things, the idealized self-object, yada, yada. So we may have been introduced many times, but never recognized. Yeah, or, you know, the old poem, we had the experience, but missed the meaning. So what we're trying to do here is to try and bring the two together, even though they were never separate. Yeah, we're trying to bring the two together, even though they were never separate. The mother and child were never separate. They were always together, and they weren't even different from each other. But for us, they seem as though. So using these kind of metaphors can kind of help you touch a more experiential side of all of this. The technical stuff can help you not go into kind of a tangled ambiguity of just raw experience that you can't shape and move into anything. So I think it's important that with whatever content you're accessing, that you don't kind of shy away from the side that you're less comfortable with. The technical side is very important. The poetic, experiential, metaphoric side is very important, and they work together perfectly. But if your tendency is more towards one than the other, you can kind of become fearful or avoidant or reactive to the other side. And then you miss the forward progress that comes from them coming together. So this is also the reason for using these two different techniques of sometimes talking in technical terms, logical terms, sometimes talking in metaphoric, poetic, artistic terms, that the two coming together is what can really help move us forward. But of course, all of us have more of an affinity to one than the other, or maybe day by day we have a different kind of connection or affinity. But the two sides are important. And in terms of just practically speaking with teachers, I think that it's useful to have both kinds in your practice. Because if you only have one, things can, you know, one that's very intellectual, things can get a bit dry or a bit too intellectual. And if things are always poetry, you don't really know what to do with that. You're all inspired and thinks it's great, and then you sit down and don't know what you're doing. You know, so whether the teacher is an actual teacher or the teacher at our level is books, to try and not I guess, overemphasize either side is really useful to bring them both together so that you're having a really rich practice. Okay, so questions about clear light or bits to clarify, or anything that comes up with this concept of like the meeting of mother and child who are actually never separated?
I was thinking about how you always need a person, a lama or somebody to show you the recognition, how important it is. And in therapy also, the process that's very similar. How the mother, I don't know, maybe the mother exists always inside of us, but we need the therapist to help us return to be a child, to correct or fix.
Introduction, yeah, an introduction. Yep. And now that you've shaken hands, you guys go do your work on your own together internally. But it is interesting. They often talk about the pointing out instruction or the guru showing you the nature of your mind. And it can sound like it's something that has nothing to do with you, when in fact, you know, basically all of our existence is trying to introduce us. You know, everything is. So whether you call it the Lama or not, everything in the world is imbued by Buddha energy. You know, the Buddha mind pervades everything. So the computer screen in front of you could be trying to introduce you, you know, the book in front of you, the light in front of you, everything's trying to introduce the mother and child clear light. But what are the particular connections and conditions that are going to make you recognize it? So you're being introduced and reintroduced and reintroduced, but what's going to make you recognize it and then develop it and then make it non-dual, as it always has been. But, you know, so it seems paradoxical to make non-dual something that is already non-dual, but that really is this razor's edge of relative truth and ultimate truth. The relative truth is that things appear dualistic, things appear subject and object. Even though that's not the case, you can't force yourself into that belief in the moment of crisis. You can pretend to have that belief in a moment of kind of unity and oneness and good meditation and things have calmed down around you. But as soon as there's crisis, you revert back to duality. And so, so it's important to kind of make sure that one is not negated, that relative truth and ultimate truth live in the same place at the same time, but we're working on two different strategies related to those two truths. And of course, one of the truths is not a truth at all. It's completely deceptive. You know, relative truth is by nature deceptive. And yet that is the appearance of our whole life. So slowly, slowly, the veil drops. The veil drops and work becomes more and more integrated. But in the meantime, knowing duality means that you work more skillfully within duality. Pretending that there's no duality just because we'd like to not think that way anymore is not enough to not think that way anymore. Okay, so we'll just take a minute and sit, reconnect, and may all of this energy lead to full awakening. So we'll see you Monday.